Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we're tuning into a session from the ABA archive with an oldie but a goodie from Winter Institute 2016, presenting the Civic Economics Study, Amazon and Empty Storefronts.
So I'm Dan Houston with Civic Economics. On the right is Matt Cunningham, my business partner, and then Stacy Mitchell, who's cool enough to join us today to talk about the policy implications of all of this by the time we're done. Normally we have a slide in here about who Civic Economics is, but we skipped that for some reason, and we're a two-man economic analysis, strategic planning, urban planning kind of a firm, do all sorts of random work. For years we always pointed out that our offices were in Austin and Chicago because that sounds cool, and now it's Tulsa and Evanston. So one of us lives in a city without a regular bookstore, for crying out loud. I won't tell you which one of us that is. We have, as Oren pointed out, a great long history with the booksellers. You are our favorite clients, and not just because your meetings involve free books. The first one we call the study that will not die. Every week, at least once, Google sends me a news alert that somebody is citing that Lamar study that we did with Steve a long, long time ago. It was like 2002. It was one of the very first things we did after starting this firm. And I'm sure you're booksellers, so you're familiar with it. We basically just decided, let's figure out what's the difference between a chain store and a local in terms of how money moves in the local economy. You know, we knew Steve had all these employees. There's a third floor up there full of people who work, whereas across the street, this is how old that study is. The great threat to society was Borders, Books, and Music, which you defeated, ultimately. And we just noticed across the street, did you notice there's a brand new stickers in the window of a closed Barnes & Noble? That's funny. So Oren was right to bring us on to talk about the fact that all these years we've been talking about these behemoths that were threatening your businesses, and they're really not very threatening anymore. After that study, we've done a number in that same line. We did in Chicago, Andersonville. We worked with Women and Children First, was one of our businesses there. We worked with the Northern California Independent Business Alliance. I don't know if Hut landed. You still with you guys, the IBA? Oh, did he? All right. He was a great guy. He was the one who invented the phrase that you hear a lot, the 10% shift. He was the one who said, let's phrase it that way. We're not telling people never go to a chain store. We're saying, let's think about our habits and think about how we change what we're doing. We worked with the New Orleans Urban Conservancy, and I see Tom Lohenberg here, with a really cool project on Magazine Street. We have a slide from that in a minute here. And then we've done two other series that were specifically for the ABA. What do we call them? Indy City Index and the Indy Impact Study Series. With the study series, how many of y'all are from a town that participated in that? We had a deal where with Oren's matching funds, we were able to come up with a way to do a study like that for many, many towns. I think we did, 15 or so towns, ultimately? Which was a pretty fun project. And the only condition on that was there had to be an ABA member bookseller participating in each of the communities. So we didn't go to the communities because for that price we weren't like having press conferences, but we did a lot with booksellers. Now all of these studies were dedicated to the idea that we want people to understand why local independent business matters. That really has caught on, right? I mean, somebody was telling me the other day, Dan Cullen was telling me the other day, like talking to a public official from, random podunk America, and the guy started quoting to him numbers that are all over the map, obviously. We've done this study so many times, variations on this. Everybody has a number, 65, 47, whatever. And the public official was insistently explaining to Dan Cullen how important small business is to the local economy, in case he didn't understand that. Now, if there is a final answer, we quit long ago trying to correct what charts and numbers people put out there because it's all over the map. If there's a final answer, it really does come from this Indy Impact series that we did with y'all. And basically, for just retailers, not restaurants, these are the numbers we ended up, 13 and 48, more or less, 14 and 48. Well, we'll round down for them and up for you, right? And that really is, after doing, this is hundreds of businesses now that we've rolled into this pile, this big spreadsheet of everybody, this is how much money recirculates in the local economy. And, restaurateurs, for some reason, are not nearly as organized as you guys are, but they have a pretty tremendous difference as well, despite the fact that even chain restaurants are fairly labor intensive. There's a lot of people who have to work there. Local restaurants are tremendous at recirculating income as well. One of the things that we've often wanted to look at was the land use implications of this discussion, and in New Orleans we got a chance to do that. So we looked at Magazine Street. Octavia Books is what, 2 blocks off Magazine? Which is an awesome, if you haven't been to New Orleans and done Magazine Street, it's a tremendous, long, skinny, curving street of small business lined up cheek by jowl. And really since Katrina, it has become, there's almost never a vacancy on Magazine for any length of time. It's just, it's damn near the perfect urban business district at neighborhood scale as you go through it. So what we looked at was, what if, because the city of New Orleans was going to subsidize anything that moved for a while there, and they really wanted a big superstore Target to happen. It was Gentilly, I think, is where they were talking about that mall site up there. But wanted to compare what would a Target look like compared to Magazine Street. And we ended up with this. This graphic is my pet peeve because the graphic designer thought it looked too imbalanced, so he made a 2-story Target out of it. When the point of the damn chart is the imbalance between how awesome Magazine Street is compared to the Target store, which would have taken up more room had he left the chart properly balanced. But the point was, Magazine Street is so much better for the economy than a Target store could ever be without blowing a stadium-sized hole in the middle of the city. So that's really one of our favorite studies we've ever gotten to do because we love New Orleans. I think we're going to, I'm sorry, I am so short on breath here. So I'm going to pass it over to Matt, thank God, and he's going to talk a little about the growth of online retail and then what we did here with empty storefronts.
Hi. So for a while now, it's been more and more obvious that, as Dan was saying, the Borders is not obviously the enemy anymore. There is no Borders, and even Barnes & Noble doesn't pose as big a threat as online, and especially Amazon does. So we've been talking with Oren for a while on how we can get numbers behind Amazon to try and show the impacts that they're having. And the online retail is really taking off. These numbers are kind of stunning to me. I did this, just pulled some numbers from the economic census that just came out from 2012. And basically, traditional retail didn't even keep pace with population growth from 1997 to 2012. So we were adding more people than we were really doing in traditional retail. However, when you went back in and added non-store retailers, basically internet firms or catalog companies, the growth was more than matched. About half the growth was online and compared to only half for brick and mortar merchants. So it's really kind of stunning that the growth of online retail and the effects that it's going to have, as you're going to see in our coming up following slides. This is what we have for Amazon. The Amazon growth, it's growing. It's growing very fast. And when we were trying to come up with estimates on how far the growth would go, it's really hard to say because they're growing at such a tremendous pace that you wouldn't think that their growth would be able to get to keep pace with their growth every year, but it really has. So it's really hard to forecast how far they're going to go. Then with Amazon Prime, obviously, that was a kind of a game changer for Amazon. They're able to get $100 per household, basically to force you to shop through them because you're getting the free shipping. Now they added Prime Now, which is basically within 2 hours you will get your items. So one of the biggest advantages that brick and mortar merchants have was the satisfaction of at least getting your product when you bought it at the store. But with Prime Now, they're able to deliver to your house within 2 hours at no extra fee. So that is really going to change a lot of aspects on retail. As you can see, a lot more merchants, a lot of chain merchants are starting to kind of compete with that and try to have a same-day shipping as well. And this chart shows, this is the distribution network that Amazon has. They originally started out really small with just a few major distribution centers located around the country. But now with Amazon Prime Now especially, they need to be closer to population centers. They need more items to be closer to the people that they're serving because one of their big challenge is obviously shipping costs. I think, what was the number, Dan? $10 billion they spent last year in shipping, I believe. So anything that's going to eliminate their shipping costs is obviously going to be huge to them. So as they built out their distribution network, they're building a lot closer to where people are living. And now we get to our empty storefronts. So basically, this study attempts to do it a little bit different than we did the other studies, as this slide shows. We used to, for the local businesses, we would follow the money and see exactly where the money went within the community. When we're doing this Amazon study, we're basically looking at what they're not doing, the uncollected taxes, unbuilt retail space, underoccupied commercial spaces, and then the workers. Because of their efficiency, they do not employ nearly as many people as brick and mortar retailers would. And we focus this study strictly on Amazon. Amazon is really hard to study, as we found out moving through the study. They really do not make very much of their data public. They have never said how many Prime subscribers they have. They do not talk about how many people even watch their shows that they put on. They don't really break down their sales very well. They just break it down into 3 broad categories. So it made it very difficult to try and get at finding out some of the answers. So we had to do a lot of online research to try and find analysts or other people that tried to kind of poke around and see exactly how Amazon makes its money. So we'll start first with the fiscal impacts. That's basically the money. How does Amazon basically get subsidized by not paying its fair share of taxes? In the USA, we estimated they did about $48 billion of retail sales. That doesn't include their Amazon web services or some of the other products. This is strictly their retail. And we estimate about $45 billion of that would be replaced by brick and mortar retailers. We didn't include some of the things like MP3 purchases or some of the video streaming that they do, because that's pretty much online. There's no real merchant that would do that if that wasn't online. Someone else, you would do it through Netflix or one of the other iTunes or something along those lines. So we have about $45 billion that would have probably got allocated in retail stores. And you can see we broke down as best we could their sales by product category. They do a lot more apparel sales than I ever would have guessed, but they're estimated to be the #1 apparel dealer within the next 3 years, which is kind of astonishing that they would sell more clothes than Macy's would. So from there, we were able to move towards our goal of seeing exactly where the money was coming from. We allocated sales by state. We used each state's share of disposable income as a proxy to assign those sales. It's amazing to me that with the growth of online shopping, that the data out there is really lacking still. There's no, I scoured the internet to try and find sources that would show, even if it wasn't Amazon, but basically how much states do, just broken down by state on how much online sales to get that, and there really is a lack of data out there. So that's why we came up with this approach to assigning sales based on the disposable income. Sure.
Did you look at like UPS?
That's all proprietary. They obviously have it, but they do not share any of that. Yeah, there's a few. We did find some, but what were they? That was like a merchant services website that we found, and it didn't seem. We did find a couple of sources, but it didn't seem like it was real. It was older data, and it was sort of like a point of sale thing, but it didn't really seem to make too much sense.
They were selling a consulting service,
right?
And they did seem to be making up the data.
Yeah, so I think we didn't use that, and we used this proxy. Right. So once we had the retail sales by state, we were able to look at the sales tax implications. 27 states, and it would be 28 soon, Denver or Colorado will start collecting sales tax on February 1st, and South Carolina just start collecting on January 1st of this year. So it's 27, soon will be 28, collect some or all of their sales tax. So that's a number that is growing, with the tax fairness is really making headway. States are realizing that it's really just losing money and hurting your local merchants, so it's really moving in the right direction. However, it's still not really there, because nationwide you can see that it's about $625 billion of uncollected sales tax from the, highlight basically the states that are showing up brighter in the reddish and orange colors are the ones that are not collecting sales tax. So that will change, obviously, in Colorado and South Carolina next year because they will start collecting it. But that's $625 billion from those states. And that's obviously some real money. The other side of it, and what I think is actually the kind of more important, is the property tax implications. Because basically Amazon is, with their distribution centers, they do not need very much space. So they don't take up very much space. Those distribution centers are located usually in the middle of nowhere, in commercial districts that are not very appealing. And they're replacing basically storefronts in downtowns and around the country. So you're basically getting huge, ugly distribution centers replacing retail storefronts downtown. And there's the urban planning side of it that affects us, but there's also the property tax implications as well. So it's the growing, so basically every state and every city collects property tax. We estimate basically on the displaced property tax nationwide about $420 billion per year by the move from distribution centers away from the retail districts downtown. And that's kind of spread a little bit more evenly around the country. This map highlights the states that are hurt by a little bit more than others. And basically these are states that are more dependent on property tax. So the more dependent your state is on property tax, the higher your color will be, because every state does lose money by the replacement. And then this map shows basically those two put together. So those red states are the ones that are hurt the most on a per household basis by Amazon not collecting their fair share of taxes. We also break out the states, and Colorado was the second highest. That number will be going down, obviously, as they start to collect sales. But Missouri is the number one loser to Amazon, about 60, I can't read that number, 67 billion, I think, per year they're losing out on tax revenue. Those are billions. Oh, no, these are millions, sorry, yes. Yeah, when you're dealing with Amazon, you do a lot more billions than you do for some other projects, so it was hard to keep that straight moving through it.
And those of y'all who are from those states that are showing up on the bottom 10 lists here, take this study home and push people. I mean, my government in Oklahoma should be ashamed that we're throwing money away at this pace. I mean, we're closing schools because we don't have that money.
And those are some pretty significant numbers, because some of the states are in the $30 per household of basically a subsidy, and that adds up. So moving on, there's also the land use impacts, which are basically the displacement of storefronts. So basically with property tax driven by the displacement of sales, there is no place. And it's really hard because a lot of these sales, a lot of the displacement isn't even stores closing. Although Walmart, for the first time, closed, I think, 154 stores in the United States, which is kind of unheard of for them. They do not like to close stores. And there were some that were just supercenters that shut down. So this is having an impact on Walmart and Target as much as it's having an impact on independent retailers. And it's really hard to put your finger on it because some of these are retail stores that just wouldn't happen. It's not that they're closing, it's just that the retail sales aren't there, so the stores aren't built in the first place. And Amazon is now targeting the frequent trip retailers with Prime Now, which that's going to be something we really have to keep an eye on. The Prime Now, the 2-hour delivery, could really significantly impact them. So basically, we were able to estimate how many stores, employees, and stores, the square footage, and employees associated with this lost retail gap to Amazon. And where am I? This slide talks about basically what I had said before, that just because you do 10% less sales doesn't mean you're going to close 10% of your store. It doesn't really work that way. But over the long run, when you aggregate things, this is the results that you would see. So the displacement of states, we just threw Colorado out as an example because we're in Colorado. So in 2014, it was about 2 million square feet of retail space unrealized in the state of Colorado. That's roughly 4 times the tenant space of the Cherry Creek Shopping Center that Dan found online. That's the equivalent of about 545 shops employing about 4,700 people that Amazon basically replaced just in the state of Colorado. And then this slide shows the kind of top 10 states. It's important to note that Amazon does have some job gains in some states because they have large distribution centers there. So the loss of sales was made up for by the location of those distribution centers that basically employ thousands of people. So you can see that I think there are 8 states that actually do gain employment from having Amazon in it. And that's usually from the one in Kentucky. It's usually around a major city, but it serves the entire region. So that's how that kind of usually works out, how they benefit one state when they're located right at the border of a neighboring state.
And that's actually likely to change in the coming years. When we were talking about this, that
Right.
they avoided putting warehouses in California because they didn't want to pay sales tax in California. You know, there was one, you know, across the state line from all sorts of places where they would go to the cheaper state, or a state that cut them a deal and wouldn't make them pay property taxes or sales taxes. Now, because they really want to open Prime now in big cities, they have to go ahead and be in LA, and they have to be, I really looked hard trying to find one of Google's normal landowners who's building a warehouse somewhere outside of Denver, because I assure you it's coming. If they right away agreed to pay sales tax now, after all this litigation, there's going to be a warehouse really close to here any day now. And who knows? I mean, it's anywhere out there by the airport.
Right. And the Prime Now distribution centers are usually smaller. I think they hold about 50,000 products compared to the millions that a regular Amazon distribution center will hold. And those are even in, I know there's a news article recently that there's one right in Midtown Manhattan in an office tower. So those are built on a little bit different scale than their traditional distribution centers. And here's a hard slide to read for you guys, but we just did the book selling impact. So we estimate that Amazon sold about $5.6 billion in books. So that could replace about 15 million square feet of bookstore space if it was independent bookstores. That's the equivalent of about 3,600 bookstores they replaced, and it would be about 40,000 extra employees if it was done through independents rather than through Amazon. So that's kind of a sobering statistic to read. And I think Dan is going to talk just about a few slides about some policy implications before we hand it back to Stacy.
Yeah, we only have a couple. Yeah, so Stacy's really here to help us sort of have this discussion with you guys about what does this all mean, and this is new information, so it'll be a while as we figure it out. A lot of our studies in the past, we've always made this point that we're not saying don't go to Walmart, we're not saying don't eat at Fridays if you like that. You know, we're saying consider what your choices are. In this case, this is a bigger beast we're looking at here, right? I mean, we both pay for Prime. Raise your hand if you use Amazon Prime. Wow, booksellers are awesome. That's, wow. Yes, we do. Where do you get your adapters for your computer these days? They're just some things. Wow. All right. I had confessed that in writing already, so it's not like it was a secret. But this is a storm that's different, right? It's qualitatively different from Barnes & Noble opening at the mall, right? This is ubiquitous. And like Matt was talking about, that Prime Now thing, normally, you know, your spouse calls and says, hey, can you pick up something on the way home today? Or we're running out of dog food, or, you know, coffee's low or whatever. And you stop after work, and routinely, that's why there's a Walgreens or a CVS or whatever on every major intersection in America, because of that convenience thing that we do. That could really be impacted by the fact that while you're at work, you have a computer. You just say, I'd like my dog food when I get home. I need whatever it is I need. We'll be waiting for you on the front porch. That could really have a big impact if people change their shopping habits in that kind of everyday shopping compared to comparably to what they've been doing with, say, books, right? Once people got that shift in their habits, it's very hard to turn this around. And Amazon is just potentially very strong as a threat in that regard. So we're not so much saying let's talk to people about Amazon. Don't shop at Amazon or don't shop at Macy's.com or what have you. although that's a discussion to be had. I think one of the things that, from where we sit, is to explain to policymakers, local level officials, that this shit matters, right? This is coming. The dollars get bigger every single day. All these numbers we look at are from 2014 today, right? 2015 blew it away. Amazon is, what, a third, quarter, maybe total of all online retail. So multiply those numbers by 3 and show this to your governor or show this to your mayor. Talk about, when we do planning projects, land use planning projects. Everybody thinks that there's plenty more stores to be built and that we should keep zoning more shopping centers and we should build out, that there should surely be enough demand to fill up this corridor in Fort Worth or whatever. There's a time coming when that may not be true because of the growth of this taking away online retail. So a lot of this taking away storefront retail. So, this is, I want you to understand the magnitude of the potential problem here that's coming down the road. And we're going to turn it over to Stacy now that we've established that it's overwhelming. And Stacy's very good at overwhelming.
Well, thank you so much. It's terrific to be back at Winter Institute. I'm Stacy Mitchell with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. We're a national nonprofit, 40-year-old national nonprofit research and educational organization. And I want to begin really by just commending Civic Economics. This is a terrific study. This is some really much needed data. It is shocking when you think about tens of thousands of people losing their jobs, thousands of empty storefronts, billions of dollars in tax revenue. I mean, this is information that is really much needed, and I kudos to the ABA for supporting this kind of analysis. So my task today is to offer just a few thoughts on how we might draw attention to the implications of this study, and then some ideas that we might think about in terms of policy solutions for curbing Amazon's power and its destructive effects. And so I've got 5 points that I wanted to share with you today. The first is that we need to generate a much bigger public conversation and discussion among elected officials about the impact of Amazon. I think most local and state officials haven't even given this a thought. This is a profound transformation in our economy that is underway, and they haven't even begun to grapple with what the implications are. I mean, this is the first time in human history that we have separated commerce from place. That's a big deal. The data in this study, I think, is really going to help. And as we think about embarking on a public education campaign around this information, I think we can really take heart in the fact that we've done this before. Many years ago, when we launched the Local First movement, people didn't even really think about independent versus chain. And today, there is a movement around independent businesses. We've got growing numbers of farmers markets and craft brews and independent bookstores and other signs of the impact of that movement. Our task now really is to bring Amazon into people's consciousness as part of that framework of thinking about the economy and thinking about their choices. My organization, ILSR, we're going to be doing more analysis and more educational materials over the coming year that I hope will help all of you in doing that in your communities. Many of you may have seen in November the Advocates for Independent Business, which is a coalition of about a dozen trade associations representing independent businesses, which ABA helped found and which ILSR coordinates. We put together an infographic. Whoops. There we go. This has, I think, been viewed hundreds of thousands of times online as sort of our best estimate. It's certainly been downloaded a lot from our website, and we've seen it all over the place. I think these kinds of tools can help spread some of the information about the jobs and tax impacts that are going on. We intend to do a lot more of this kind of thing over the coming year. But one of the things that I think we've really learned with the Local First movement is that educational messages have a lot more power and impact if they're coming from somebody else in your community than if they're coming from some national organization, right? And so I would really encourage all of you to think about who are the other organizations in my town that would be concerned about these things? How can we, are there opportunities maybe to do a public forum on Amazon? Is there a group that would host that kind of thing? How might you take some of this data and produce an op-ed for your local newspaper, either you or someone else in your community who's prominent, drawing on some of these numbers from your own state. Or plant this idea in a business reporter in your town. Send them an email and say, have you seen this study? Have you seen what this means for the state of Colorado or the state of Washington? And see if you can't generate a news story that way. I think that kind of conversation at the local level is going to be really critical for people really hearing and thinking about these implications. And then lastly on this front, I'm really interested in the idea of proposing sessions at conferences that elected officials go to. So the National League of Cities, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the American Planning Association, they all do big conferences. I've spoken at some of them in the past about local retail, but I think we ought to get together a good session on Amazon and start making the rounds and speaking to local officials about this. Second, we need to enlarge people's understanding of who's affected. So far, I think some of the media coverage has focused a fair amount on the book industry, and for very good reason, but I think people don't really realize the scope of Amazon. And I think as we try to think about helping people grapple with Amazon as an aspiring monopolist, as a company that wants to be the gatekeeper between people and everything that they buy, we're going to need more stories from a variety of industries to help reinforce this and to show how this is playing out. A few years ago, I wrote a white paper for ASTRA, the American Specialty Toy Retailing Association, which is toy retailers and small toy manufacturers. And the stories that I heard from some of these small toy manufacturers were just as harrowing as the stories you hear about small publishers and how they've been dealt with by Amazon. Companies that were multi-generational companies that almost went out of business because Amazon was so callous in how it dealt with them and dealt with their products. But the public so far doesn't really, think about Amazon as the largest toy retailer or as a destructive force in the toy industry, because those kinds of stories really haven't gotten out there yet. And so I think we need to think about some of our allies and the range of businesses and constituencies and industries that are affected and figure out how to lift up more of that conversation into the media. Third, we need to redouble our efforts to expose and eliminate the public subsidies that continue to fuel this company's growth. I think I read on the ABA website that more than 80% of independent bookstores are now in states where Amazon collects sales tax, which is terrific. But for those of us who are still in states where Amazon is not collecting, in my home state of Maine, the problem is, of course, as bad as it ever was and only grows more unconscionable as Amazon grows larger. We really need to double down on our efforts to make sure every state passes e-fairness legislation, and I think we need to use those efforts to continue to illustrate that this is a company that takes more than it gives back to our communities. The other big way in which Amazon is getting subsidized by the public now is through economic development incentives that are given out for its warehouses. You saw the slide that Matt showed of their warehouse growth. I mean, they have been building in the last few years lots and lots of new warehouses across the country. They are going to local governments and county governments and saying, give us a big tax break, give us free money for putting up this warehouse. We've been tallying those giveaways over the last 2 years alone, over $430 million in public subsidies to finance Amazon's growth. And that doesn't even count all the road improvements that have to be done around these warehouses because of the truck traffic. It doesn't count the fact that the employees who work there don't earn enough to meet their basic needs and are on health care and publicly subsidized food stamps and the like. There are all kinds of ways in which public dollars are being used to fund this company's growth, and we need to lift that up more. ILSR did an op-ed in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune last year about one of these proposals to give millions of dollars to a warehouse just outside the Twin Cities. We sparked a big outcry when this was published, and the town that was doing this did walk those subsidies back. They still gave them some amount, I can't quite remember, but they cut it by about 2/3 in terms of the giveaway. We need to, as I said, really lift up just the scope of these kinds of subsidies. And when you think about the idea of local governments giving that money away so that they can then lose more tax and property tax revenue in the long run, this is insane. Fourth, I think that we need to become a lot more assertive about the fact that independent retailers create substantial economic value for cities that goes beyond the jobs and the tax revenue they generate. Independent retailers are really central to placemaking, right? And vibrant places, in turn, are a huge driver of a city's economy and of its prosperity. There's a lot of empirical research on this, a lot of scholarship, that street-level diversity and the kinds of human interaction that occur in those places that independent retailers create, that drives invention, innovation, and investment in a big way in a community. It's what attracts other kinds of businesses. It's what attracts people to be in that place. And I think, in the same way that my sense is that brick and mortar retailers have been making a case to their suppliers of saying, you know what, we do more than sell your goods. We offer all this kind of value because we're showcasing and talking about your products. I think we need to start having a conversation with city officials that says, look, we're offering all this other value. And given that additional value, and given the threat that Amazon poses to your revenue base, what is it that you're going to do to help support independent retail? Every year in this country, local and state governments spend $70 billion subsidizing economic development, subsidizing companies in the name of economic development. Imagine if we cleaved off, 90% of those dollars, by the way, go to big companies, right? Imagine if we cleaved off some of that and began to spend it on placemaking. And we think about how might we create the kinds of vibrant places that nurture independent businesses? How might we create grant and other support programs to help new entrepreneurs get started? How might we take public programs to begin to think about the problem of rising rents for independent retailers? Maybe we can help more independent retailers buy their building. Maybe we can reduce property tax rates to account for the added value they bring to a community. I think there are all kinds of ideas out there. We need to start that conversation. ILSR is going to be releasing probably in a couple of months an independent business policy platform, and I hope that'll be a useful tool for you all to take and begin that conversation with local and state elected officials. One of the things I think, Matt, you mentioned is that I think it's worth keeping in mind that as Amazon grows, it's likely actually to disrupt the chain store big box economy probably even more than the impact on independent retailers. As Matt mentioned, just last week, Walmart announced the closing of 269 stores worldwide, 154 of those in the U.S. It's a small part of their footprint, but it may be a sign of things to come. If you think about what the value proposition is of Target and Walmart, we have a lot of goods under one roof and low prices. They don't have anything to stand on that Amazon can't beat them at. Oh, and by the way, you have to drive here and the lines are long, right? We are going to begin to see, this is going to really, I think, going to begin to get quite ugly over time in terms of vacancies among big box retailers. And as cities begin casting about for some kind of solution and way out of that, I think the solution really is investing in real neighborhoods, in real business districts that have a mix of uses, that are pedestrian-oriented, that create the kind of urban environment that people are seeking. And independent retailers really excel at being able to do that, creating experience, community, place. So we are, you all are the solution to this kind of looming problem in many respects. Finally, Amazon exposes the gross inadequacies of our current antitrust policy. I want to show you 3 charts that I think really get at the market power and the sort of the scariness of what Amazon means to the economy. Whoops. So this is, over about a 20-year period, the income, the profits of Walmart shown in green there, and Amazon. As you can see, Amazon has hovered at about zero, has losses in a lot of years. Over this period, Amazon has posted total profits of about $2 billion. Over that same period, Walmart has posted $185 billion worth of profits. Last year, in 2014, Walmart generated $16 billion in profits and paid out to its investors $7.2 billion in dividends, right? So given that disparity, how would you think Wall Street would value these two companies, right? $198 billion for Walmart, $270 for Amazon. What is this about? What this is about, I think, is that Wall Street is looking at a company that is preparing to have the kind of monopoly profits that come with really dominating a critical part of the U.S. economy, right? Because they're not getting paid now. They're thinking this is coming down the line. Here's another one. Online retail is growing massively. Amazon's share of it is growing even faster. In December, 50% of new online spending went to Amazon. Its current market share is about 20%. So as this market becomes bigger, it's not creating new opportunities. It's not becoming more diverse. It's becoming more consolidated. In fact, when there are successful new entrants, think of Zappos, think of diapers.com, Amazon threatens them and then buys their business. This is not the kind of competition that kind of competitive market that we ought to have. And here's the last one. As recently as 2009, most people, when they wanted to buy something online, started at a search engine like Google. So Google is shown in gray over there on the left, the share of people starting their search at Google, and in orange, the share of people starting their search just starting at Amazon, not even looking anywhere else. As you can see, Amazon's shares by 2014 has gone to 40%. Today, it's about half. Half of people are just starting at Amazon. They're not even looking through a search engine. You know, what this really looks like to me, and what I think it really resembles, is railroads. 100 years ago, when the railroads first came through, they were owned by industrialists who also owned other kinds of businesses. They owned granaries, they owned steel mills, and they would use their ability to price what it costs to move your goods on the railroad to disadvantage their competitors in those other industries, until the U.S. government stepped in and said, no, you're a common carrier, you have to treat everybody fairly, right? This is starting to look a lot like that. 44% of all the stuff that's shipped on Amazon comes from third-party sellers, right? These are businesses that decided, I can't make a go of it with my own website because everybody's starting their shopping on Amazon, I got to be there too. This sets up, I think, a really sort of stunning thing that antitrust authorities need to be looking at. So we have Amazon as a power buyer, as a company that is a monopsonist that is able to intimidate suppliers and use that power to undermine its competitors. And Amazon as a gatekeeper, as a platform that's able to use its role in the whole infrastructure of commerce to also undermine competition. Frank Foer, in writing a cover story for the New Republic about a year or so ago, said, quote, in effect, we've been thrust back 100 years to a time when the law was not up to the task of protecting the threats to democracy posed by monopoly, a time when the new nature of the corporation demanded a significant revision of government. Antitrust was not always as weak as it was today, by a long shot. We've gone in sort of a little bit of this kind of cycle throughout our history. The first 80 years of the U.S., we were very good about preventing market concentration. That began to change in the late 19th century. We had the rise of the Gilded Age. And then the progressives and FDR, really strong. They put in place antitrust rules that created the kind of amazing economic growth, diversity, rising middle class that we had through much of the 20th century. And then that all began to change in the 1980s, and we really just stepped back entirely from antitrust. I think that we're at a moment, and I think Amazon is a company that is really beginning to get antitrust scholars and regulators and others going, wait a second, have we gone too far in this direction of being laissez-faire about this stuff? Last year, I gave a talk at a day-long event organized by the American Antitrust Institute in Washington on antitrust and entrepreneurship, on small business. They had a bunch of regulatory folks from the DOJ there, a lot of scholars, and it really was to me a sign that this conversation is beginning to happen, that there's beginning to be some thought about where we are, and I hope that you all and we all can help continue that conversation. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
All right, so we get to go a little long, or 10 minutes. All right, so we're going to, we thought this crowd would be small enough we could just huddle around a laptop and have a conversation. So I'm not sure we planned this quite right. I do want to point out real quick, so that just ignore the findings part because we'll talk about all that stuff another time. But the bottom is a link that will go live when I sit back down with the computer and the internet soon. So you can link and download. There's a full study. There's more copies of this executive summary there. There's graphics from the studies. And then there's a summary for every state. So you can get a one-page sheet that has basically those findings for your state or your friend's state, whatever you want to show, all available for download off of our website in the next hour or two. I know we're supposed to tell you to please evaluate this session. Oh. I'm trying. It takes a second. Yeah, and it's going to be linked. It's going to be really easy to find. I promise you. It'll be right off the front. We'll make it very obvious that it's there. And throw it on Facebook. Share it with the world because we're excited about this one. And we want this to supplant Steve's study as the study that will never die. Because it's not talking about a company that's already out of business. So in this little bit of time we have left, I don't know how we can manage this. If we have some questions, some discussion for people who want to ask some questions, how about in the back?
I don't know if what you just talked about is going to be anywhere that we can access.
Pardon?
What Stacy just spoke about.
Yes.
The question I thought was if I should stand. So the question was whether any of what I talked about is going to be accessible. Certainly, ilsr.org is our website, and if you go there, you'll see independent business is one of the sectors that we work on, so you can click on that. I'm happy to send you the slides and the notes from the talk. I won't be publishing them.
We are also recording this session, and we'll make it available through bookweb.org immediately after the rest.
Great. I also do a monthly newsletter called the Hometown Advantage Bulletin. So if you want to keep up with new research that we're doing in this area and the release of the policy platform and stuff, that'd be great to sign up for that Hometown Advantage Bulletin.
Thank you.
Has anybody ever seen the sales materials and their pitches that Amazon brings to every local government? I mean, I know there's such a difficult organization, but I just wondered if there was any ever printed material that they show up at local city officials and hand out and what their arguments are and what their position looks like so that you can counter that.
Well, I'd say from our perspective that we really haven't lost much sleep about the distribution center piece of this because honestly, if Ingram shows up in your town and wants to build a distribution center, your city officials will fall all over themselves to give them free stuff too. So yeah, Amazon shows up and their argument is, we will occupy a building and we will put people to work in it. Do you want us here or not? Which is the same argument Walmart makes. Walmart also gets subsidies for the distribution center. It's the same Chrysler parts distribution center. These things tend to get subsidies. You can see the towns that have them when you drive around on the outskirts of this metro. And distribution centers are fairly ubiquitous, and they're really well understood. So Amazon doesn't have to explain very much to a city official what it is, county official. There's are actually more labor intensive than anybody else's distribution centers because they break the product down further to do that last set of packaging. So their sales pitch is probably not very hard for a county official to agree to come up with some kind of a deal for them. Hopefully nobody ever waives the sales tax bid of this anymore. People in cities do that kind of thing, but property tax breaks are kind of common for distribution.
On that chart, the one that is up now, you didn't emphasize this in your report, but that total job loss number, we really believe represents a good bit of the soundbite for how we talk about this moving forward. I mean, that is a staggering number of 135,000 net loss of jobs to the American economy. And I think that's a pretty powerful message to bring back to your local officials.
135,000 from just this one piece of the internet a year ago. I mean, I hate to add qualifiers when you're going to talk to a reporter because they're never going to understand that you qualified the thing you're saying. But this shit is just growing every single day. It's bigger than when we wrote it 2 weeks ago. Amazon has bought airplanes and trucks since we wrote this 2 weeks ago. We quit adding bits about Amazon into the full report because it's every day that they've done something new. Yes.
It's great to have the data and accessible to all of us individually. And it was great to hear the authors discussing what other groups are doing. Maybe not right now, but maybe in the forum in just a few minutes, we could hear what ABA is doing with regional groups, the booksellers associations, and trying to organize efforts around the local discussions with local leaders, mayors, city councils, and things like that. Because it seems like that's the piece that's missing.
And 30.
You point to people because you know who's here.
Carol, go ahead.
To follow up on what this gentleman said about what Amazon presents to the government officials, it seems to me they always give a very high wage number. We're going to bring in these high wage jobs, and yet you talk to the people who work in the Amazon warehouses and they're not making that money, and I wonder if anybody's ever followed up to find out really what the...
Yeah, Amazon does a funny thing, and partly it's because they're growing so fast that they don't know 2 years from now what a warehouse is going to look like. So in a place, I just followed the one in Seguin, or San Marcos, where they built a big one, and they had subsidies, so they had to publicize some information. They established a threshold that we're going to have at least this many workers and at least this much in wages for those people. And then they never again tell you how many people work in there or whatever. Now they do presumably have to report to the city or county that they are meeting those. But we tried to come up with looking at individual warehouses to say, how many people work in Amazon distribution, getting at it from that direction. No possible way to know how many people work in any of them. But you'll see the news story that, so the one in San Marcos went from, they opened with, 800, 1,000 people, and then they went to 2,000. And then it's insanely cyclical with them, seasonal. So an awful lot of those jobs that they provide are seasonal.
Right. I guess what I was asking is, has anybody followed up on their promises?
Well, as far as it said is, yes, that's, unless your government sucks, then they are in fact pursuing.
They are notorious for not following up on those types of subsidies. So it wouldn't surprise me if not all of them were followed up on.
I think the other thing that's worth keeping in mind about this really huge number is that this is the tip of the iceberg because Amazon's moving to automation. They've invested heavily in Kiva robots, and their newest warehouses are highly automated, very, and that's the direction that they're going to go. They're also a major player in the bigger. Oh, sorry. I was just saying that this is the tip of the iceberg because they're automating their warehouses. They bought Kiva robotic systems, and their latest warehouses are almost entirely automated. There are very few humans actually involved in doing it, and that's the direction they're going to go with everything. And the other thing is that they're a big player in what's become known as the gig economy, which is like the Uber economy. More and more people who are most of these people who work for Amazon are not working directly for Amazon. They're working for staffing agencies, and they're temps. And the way they know if they have a shift today is they get a message on their phone. They never know day to day when they're going to work. And they're often perma-temps. They work there all the time. But they have none of the benefits of regular employment. And the qualities of these jobs is terrible. We've been doing analysis of the wages, and they're significantly lower than other warehouse jobs, supplying Walmart or supplying independents or what have you. There is a whole conversation going on among people in the workers' rights movement, unions, and so on about this stuff as well, and they're going to be increasingly, I think, targeting and thinking about Amazon, and so I think that's worth keeping in mind, is that conversation about Amazon's effectiveness is underway too.
Kenny?
Stacy, when you were talking about the displacement of the big box stores, it struck me that might have a disproportionate impact on elderly folks, particularly in a rural area, and I was wondering if you thought there was any traction in that, because the Walmarts have already displaced this fee structure that had been there before, and with that gone, and with their inability, so at least a more widespread inability to use something like Amazon Prime now, that seemed like maybe a good argument to make locally.
Yeah, I think low-income folks too, because if you live in an apartment building and you work all day, how do you get a delivery? I mean, it's, or maybe you don't have a credit card. I mean, this is an economy that really works well, the Amazon model, for more affluent folks, but not necessarily for people who really depend on having businesses in their neighborhoods. I think that's right.
I was wondering with the DOJ, it always seems like the consumer is king over this is an unhealthy marketplace, and trying to change that conversation. But also too, talking about the taxes, I am a newly elected official to my city council, and we're talking about the empty storefronts. We just adopted a resolution about, and so did other economic development situations, and our city adopted the resolution about the Marketplace Fairness Act. But talking about still, Amazon will not collect, if you have a home rule sales tax, that portion is still not going to be collected because they're paying basically the state rate.
What state are you in?
Illinois.
Oh, yes.
Yes, we talked to you.
There were a handful of states, right, I think, that have some kind of there's a smaller gap in the total, because they're not,
There is. So
as if the software couldn't totally do this.
Oh, yeah. But it's that there's a lot of situations like that. But I'm also wondering, how can we create a template letter with a lot of this information, local or municipal level, or county or state, and really show what this really means, because it's beyond just sales tax. It is so far beyond that. And to understand, because there's so many people who, when you put out a lot of this information, they go, I need to buy things for price, but they don't understand the ramifications of the rest of all of this, which are much. So.
Go ahead, Judy.
Just to follow up on that, what I was going to point out before is form letters would be awesome for public officials, but anyone in this room and beyond can write an op-ed for their local newspaper, and it's a small start, but it's something. And it does get eyes looking and reading and becoming more knowledgeable about the fact that the low prices are going to happen. So if you guys have the power to just write a local letter to the editor, or they'll take an op-ed from a business person, perhaps, small.
Yeah, you really have time just for one more. Tom, go ahead.
I'm not sure when the official release of the whole study is, but I would like to see, maybe working with ABA, I would, in our own state, I'd be interested in putting out a press release, coming up with the Louisiana aspects of this, highlighting that.
Yeah.
And I think if we all did that and got it out to our local newspapers, that we'd have, much bigger impact than just writing letters. I mean, I think we ought to make a really strong effort to get a simultaneous kind of response nationwide.
Especially if you're in a state that glows bright red on the map.
Yeah.
A state that can't afford to leave crap on the table. So there's a state somewhere you can open that's going to be this for Louisiana to build on.
For every state.
So we all have a chance to continue this discussion session. These panels will be tomorrow. We'll certainly bring it to the town hall meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!